No, thank you for joining us. And may I ask, first of all, how did you react when you were told that your security details being removed from you? And when, in fact, did you find out?
Well, the Secret Service let me know at about 11:30 p.m. on inauguration day that that they would be removed by noon on Tuesday. I was disappointed but not surprised at this. When I resigned as National Security Advisor, Trump pulled the Secret Service about 2 hours later. Normally, somebody in that job, after he leaves, gets it for 3 or 4 months just for caution's sake. But anyway, I got through that, but there wasn't a direct threat from the Iranians at that point. And as you may know, a day or so later, Trump removed former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's security detail provided by the State Department, by the Diplomatic Security Bureau. So I think it's a mark of Trump's character or lack thereof that he does that sort of thing. He doesn't like criticism, and but it's a very discouraging signal to send to many in the government that when a foreign government threatens your life and potentially your family, that the U.S. government, at least if it's Donald Trump as president, walks away.
May I ask, Mr. Bolton, you obviously have also served as an ambassador to the United Nations, so you have really worked far and wide on the global stage. Obviously, when President Trump first came in his first term, you were seen as quite a big coup for President Trump in terms of agreeing to serve as part of that administration. And then obviously subsequently there's been quite a big fallout. What has led to the souring of that relationship? Was it just a case of you felt you were unable to get across the very serious and real threats that you felt that the president needed to understand about?
Right. Well, what I believed when I took the job was that like every one of his 44 predecessors, the gravity of the responsibilities that Trump had, the potential significance of his decisions, certainly in the national security sphere, would help discipline his thinking because there's so much at stake that you can't afford casual decisions. You have to think about the long-term consequences. And so I thought, notwithstanding he didn't have a background in these matters, that he could learn what he needed to learn and make responsible decisions, not necessarily ones I would agree with, but responsible decisions. And I found out I was completely wrong. Nothing disciplines Donald Trump, and I think you can see the consequences as they played out in the first term, and just these opening days, the same way in the second term.
Now, President Trump normally would refer to you as, well, he used the term warmonger. He would be referred to as someone who's hawkish and is pro getting into conflicts because he would try and claim that you're somehow profiteering from military defense contracts and et cetera, because of contacts. I mean, when you hear this, what do you think? How do you react? Does it actually cause severe threats from within the United States towards your safety?
No, I haven't experienced that. My circumstance, and I think the others we're talking about here, really are affected by Iran. But it's not good management. It doesn't build morale in your staff. In fact, the atmosphere in the Trump White House was a kind of Hobbesian war of all against all, which is hardly efficient. And I think again, looking at even these early days and the people he's nominated for senior positions, it looks like it'll be more of the same in the second term. And all I can say is I wish at some point I were profiteering from the aerospace and defense industry in the United States. That is not the case, however.
Now, Mr. Bolton, we've had it come up that President Putin has said that he and President Trump should meet to discuss Ukraine and energy prices. Obviously, President Trump has said that he would be keen to sit down with President Xi as well of China in order to use President Xi in order to help him try and put pressure on President Putin. I think you've been quite open in your own book that President Trump was someone who was actually looking to use President Xi to assist him in trying to seek re-election. Do you think that President Trump has the capability, the skills to sit down and come to a conclusion on Ukraine? Do you think that a deal should or can be done in this regard? Or do you think that Putin is such a threat that actually we should be backing Ukraine and holding the line?
Well, I wish our backing for the Ukraine and NATO's as a whole had been more effective over the past 3 years. I think part of the reason for the gridlock is that while we provided enormous quantities of assistance, we didn't do it in a strategic fashion. We didn't think through what Ukraine needed in a coherent way. And so we dribbled it out, one weapon system after another. And that's one reason why the battlefield looks like it does. I don't think China has the slightest interest of being a fair mediator between Russia and Ukraine. I think they're on Russia's side. I think they have been from the beginning. They've helped Russia in many ways, financially, purchasing oil and gas, laundering sanctioned Russian financial institutions, resources, and that sort of thing. I do think that we're moving toward negotiation between Ukraine and Russia almost inevitably. Trump wants it. I think most Europeans want it. I sense a lot of people are getting tired of this. That's unfortunate. I'm very worried about how this is going to come out for Ukraine because I think the way that Vladimir Putin can work Trump over gets for Russia more of what it wants than what's really good for America.
My concern would be, Mr. Bolton, so you know, that history teaches us a big lesson, and that when you cede a little bit of territory and agree to something, particularly as we saw in Nazi Germany, they kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And my fear with President Putin is that he may agree to something in the short term. We might get some nice platitudes, but ultimately we'll start to see forces push further and further into Ukraine again. And whether or not the international community would then rally up one more time, I fear would be difficult to see in the short term, which would only play into President Putin's hand. Is that, do you think, a fair assessment, or do you think that's a slightly sort of rose-tinted view of history?
No, I think that is a fair assessment. We know from statements Putin has made going back to 2005 that he thinks the breakup of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. He wants to put back together the Russian Empire, not the Soviet Union, but the Russian Empire. And to that Russian view of their place in the world, it includes Ukraine. So he tried once in 2014. He didn't get as much as he wanted. He tried in 2022. He didn't get as much as he's wanted, obviously. So if there were a ceasefire in place, I think you'd have a new border between Ukraine and Russia along that ceasefire line. And at some point in the future, 5 years, some period down the road, after his military has been rebuilt, we'd see a third invasion.
Do you think if there is a sort of no-go zone that's policed, would American soldiers have to be on the ground, or do you think that's the responsibility of NATO?
Well, I think there's zero chance Trump would contribute American forces to that, and I think people ought to be very careful of this idea of peacekeeping in the UN context. It freezes conflicts. If that were the way it played out, I think Ukraine could kiss most of that territory goodbye for the foreseeable future. I think anytime you freeze a line and then it goes over and over year by year because of negotiations, it's very hard to get back. And people talk about peacekeepers, but not the rules of engagement. If the Russians violate the terms of the ceasefire, can the peacekeepers use force to push it back? Or like most UN peacekeepers, are they restricted to using force only in their own self-defense? There's a big difference, and whether NATO could take the secondary role, I would be very surprised. I don't know who the troop contributing countries would be.